In a time when all the e-bike companies seem to be chasing the same style one after the other with kind of a copy and paste status, Vvolt is clearly doing something different. We're talking a Gates carbon belt drive, 3-speed automatic shifting, and a mid-drive motor pumping out 120 Newton meters of torque, plus 30 mils of suspension in the monoshock here. It's clear that Vvolt has gone a whole new path with this bike. Now, after a week of testing and riding it, I'm here to share whether that path is leading to greatness or if it's just a bold detour. So I'm Mike with EBR. Stick around and let's take a deep dive into Vvolt's new Centauri II. Now, the Vvolt Centauri II is a Class 3 commuter or recreational style bike, and it is UL 2849 certified, and its current MSRP is $29.99. Now, this comes in two frame colors. The one we're looking at here is called Forest Planet, which is kind of a matte light green, but they also have another color called Galactic Storm, which is kind of an icy blue, silver blue color, kind of a nice light blue look to it. Now, it does come in 3 frame sizes, which is not something we see often in the direct-to-consumer e-bike market, but it is nice to see because it just gives more precise fitting for each height of rider. Now, between the 3 sizes of frames, you can fit riders ranging all the way down to 4'9" and all the way up to 6'4" with nice specific small, medium, large, and large, extra large frame sizes. Now, some specific geometry numbers for this large frame that we have. The standover height, because it's kind of a mid-step here, it is 26 inches. The reach up top is 15.5 inches. You have 8 inches of adjustability in the seat post, and then you also have a 44-inch wheelbase from rear hub to front hub. And the max payload on this bike is a pretty substantial 440 pounds. Now, when it comes to accessories and the way the bike is kitted out, this does have 27.5-inch double-walled alloy wheels, and mated to those are 27.5 by 2.4-inch commuter tires that have reflective stripes and some nice light commuter tread patterns on them. Now, as far as PSI goes, they say you can run between 40 and 65 pounds on these tires. I've been running in the low 40s, and I found that still gives a nice, comfy, kind of wider footprint for absorbing some minor imperfections in the road, and it still gave me plenty of traction and speed as far as light rolling resistance goes. Now, in terms of racks and fenders, the bike does come with alloy fenders, both front and back, that are painted matte black. And then when it comes to racks, it's not standard, but they do have this optional rack that mounts here in the rear, and it has a 40-pound payload capacity on it. Now, when it comes to mounting points, we have several here to kind of rig the bike out the way you want. Obviously, we have the rear rack mounting points that I've just pointed out right here, but also up front on the fork, you have a few bosses on both sides of the fork, which I really like seeing. It just opens up a whole new world of other areas you can add storage, bags, and accessories to. I like seeing that on all forks, so it was nice to see on this bike. Then you also have 2 on the seat tube here, and then 2 on the underside of the top tube. So lots of places to mount water bottle cages, accessories, bags, storage. Really, you can kind of just do what you want with this as far as mounting points go. There's no shortage. Now, when it comes to lighting, because it is a true commuter, it's got a headlight up front that's mounted, kind of integrated into the frame, which is kind of a unique design. And on the rear, you have a wired-in taillight that only acts as a taillight. It does not have a brake light or turn signals, but it's got about a 220-degree field of view. Now, that headlight up front is also rated at 65 lux. It's plenty bright for just getting around and being seen. It's not super bright for late night having great visibility, but for being seen on the roads, commuting, low light conditions, it does the job just fine. Now, when it comes to the weight, they say that the Vvolt Centauri II here comes in at 50 pounds. So when I got this in for testing, I threw it up on our scales. With the battery, it came in at 55 pounds. Without the battery, it came in at 49 pounds. So take that for what you will. Now, when it comes to motor and battery, this is where things start to get a little bit interesting on the Vvolt Centauri. So right here in the back, it looks like there's a rear hub motor, but that is actually the 3-speed automatic gear shifting. What we do have is a mid-drive motor made by Ananda. Now, this motor is nominally rated at 350 watts, and it can peak at 650 watts and has a very respectable 120 Newton meters of torque. Now, it's activated through both a cadence and torque sensor, and I think the mid-drive on this feels really nice. It's also very quiet, which is always a plus. Now, in terms of riding modes, this is one of the few bikes where you have 5 instead of 3 or 4, and those modes are chill, which is, as you would guess, the least amount of assist you can get. Then it has Eco, Tour, Sport, and finally Turbo, and those progressively get faster, with Turbo being the max power you can get. Now again, this is a class 3 bike, so up to 28 miles an hour, but one important thing to note about this motor and the drive modes is there is no throttle on this bike. Now, they do have kind of a workaround around that. I think they did the throttle by design, obviously, but what they provided up there was what they call a boost button. Now, the boost button is something you can hit that will give you 4 seconds of maximum power only when you're traveling between 5 and 20 miles an hour. So you can't use it from a dead stop like a throttle, and you can't use it over 20 miles an hour, but it really does shine when you're in a situation, because it's a single speed fixed gear. If you encounter a super steep hill or just some terrain that the current gearing ratio is maybe making you work a little bit harder than you wanted to, even with the motor, you can use that boost button and it's gonna get you over those tough spots should you need them. But I can say the gear ratio on this, which we'll get into in the next section, is actually geared really well. And I only used the boost mode just when I wanted to for fun. There was really no other reason to, because I found the gearing to be actually done really well. Now, when it comes to the battery, this is the fully frame integrated 36-volt battery that's got 13.4 amp hours, giving it 490 watt hours total. Now, it is UL 2271 tested, and it has a 3-year warranty, as well as the whole bike, which is probably one of the better standard warranties I've seen across all of the direct-to-consumer e-bike brands. 3 years is definitely one of the more standout options. Now, you can remove and secure this battery with a key. I'll show you how that works right now. So the Vvolt here comes with a couple keys. You put it in the side spot here, and that will drop the battery out the front. You can catch it, release from the bottom, and you do have a port here for off the bike charging. So if you want to take this battery inside at night and charge it, or just kind of secure it while you're at work or something, it is easy to do that and still charge off the bike. Now, to put it back, you simply put the bottom in first and then the rest of the battery. So the bottom goes in and the top clicks in, and you can pull the key out. Now, when it comes to range on this 490 watt hour battery, Vvolt says you can get up to 60 miles. So I took it for a range test, and I did 2, one in the lowest level of assistance, so in that chill mode, and then one in the highest level of assistance at the turbo mode. Now, in the minimum PAS, I was able to get 49 miles. And in the maximum PAS, I still got 24 miles. So roughly anywhere between 25 and 50 were my real world results when it comes to range. Now, when it comes to the drivetrain and components, that's where things also continue to kind of be interesting on the Vvolt Centauri II. So it is a standard single speed setup. You've got a 22 tooth rear cog and a 46 tooth chainring up front. Now, that gear ratio has been plenty good for me on flats and even varied terrain. I'm still able to pedal up to speed up into the higher 20s without any ghost pedaling, which is always a good sign of good gear ratio. I've also found that on flats and varied terrain, I never wanted more or needed more. The only time I ever thought it would need more would be on a steep hill, and then things like that boost button come in handy to help you get over those hurdles as you encounter them. Now, back here in the rear hub, it looks like a rear hub motor, but the motor is obviously the mid-drive. So back here is the automatic 3-speed gearbox. So this bike has all the shifting covered for you. You don't have even the option to manually shift up top in the cockpit. The bike figures out when you need to shift up, when you need to shift down. And because there's only 3 speeds, it doesn't have to make too many choices, which I think was by design, obviously, and it was also a good choice. If you have too many gears for a bike to always be selecting the perfect gear, like on a higher end bike, you might have 12 to 24 speeds, and that's great for fine-tuning your ride on a performance bike. But on a general cruiser, commuter, you don't need to make a lot of shift changes, and this bike does a good job of knowing when to make those changes. Now, up front at that chainring, you also have a, belt ring and a belt guard here on the side to kind of prevent any kind of hang up in your pant leg from getting caught up in the belt while you're riding. And that's mated to 170 millimeter alloy crank arms that also have some pedal strike boots on them for just protecting those alloy ends. And then they also have Well-Go flat pedals with traction studs and reflectors. And those pedals are also aluminum pedals, so they have a little bit of life built into them over, say, a plastic option. Now the brakes on this are Shimano MT200, which is a pretty standard entry-level hydraulic disc brake setup that gets the job done on all sorts of bikes, including the Centauri II. They're wildly popular for a reason. They don't have a huge cost associated with them, but they have excellent brake performance. Now these are 2-piston calipers mated to 180 millimeter rotors, and all in all, the braking, as I expected, felt just fine on the Centauri II. Now moving up to the saddle here. This is the Vvolt Comfort Gel saddle. I found it to be plenty comfortable, although I will say on rides exceeding like 2 hours on the long range test, I did find it to be a little firm for my liking, but seats are one of those things that are very subjective to each individual person, and they're easy to fix or swap out should you not like the seat. Moving up front though, we have the most interesting part of this bike, in my opinion, and that's their monoshock. Now, those of you who are old like me may remember the days of Cannondale's head shock, which was also a head tube integrated suspension. Now, this is a new modern take on that. What we have here is this boot covering 30 mils of travel. Here, I'll push on it and you can see that boot kind of compressing as I do it. Now, there's no adjustability on this suspension, and they say the only maintenance you'll need to do is just a simple update of grease from time to time when it warrants it. Now, I did notice this doesn't feel like a full suspension fork. If you're used to riding on 120 millimeters of travel with some air springs, and then you went to this, you might think this is not as good. It's just a different kind of beast. This takes the edge off of bumps, and on a commuter or a city bike, I think that's really all you need. You're not jumping this, you're not landing and needing 120, 150 mils of travel. This 30 mils is really good at just taking that edge off the ride without going with a full-on heavy front suspension fork. Now up here in the cockpit, we do have a 730 millimeter wide handlebar that's got a 15-degree rise with a 12-degree sweep backwards. On either end, we have lock-on ergonomic rubber grips and Shimano MT200 brake levers for both. We also, on the left side here, have the PAS control buttons with headlight buttons. Over on the right, we have our obligatory e-bike bell. And we also have the boost button. That's that button I was referring to that will give you 4 seconds of max power anywhere between 5 and 20 miles an hour, just to kind of get you over any tough areas you might be riding. All in all, the wiring on this is fairly clean, although it gets a little, I would like to see maybe these put in one consolidated wire cover and ran into the frame, but all in all, it's not overly undone and overly messy. But let's take a closer look at this display, because there's quite a few things you can mess with in the display area of the Vvolt Centauri II. All right, so this is the home screen on the Vvolt Centauri II's display. So right now it's showing no range remaining because the pedal assist feature is off. We do have a battery bar indicator up here showing a full charge, and then right here in the center is our speed in miles per hour. Now here on the left side is the button controls, and we'll use the mode button, the middle button, to go through these different data screens on the bottom. So right now we've got remaining range, and when you turn on pedal assist, you'll see that will give you a number estimating how much range is left. And as you get higher in power, so now we're in turbo, it went from 62 down to 40, and then ultimately it keeps going down as you get higher. So if we cycle through the menu screens, we have cadence here. You can see your pedaling cadence, you can see the odometer, trip meter, time on the bike, average speed, max speed, almost 35 miles an hour, pretty impressive. And then your real-time power output while you're pedaling, and you have your average watt hours, as well as your constant watt hours, and then when you're back to your range. Now to get into advanced settings, one other feature right here on the side, you have a weatherproof cover that supports USB-A charge output. So you can charge your phone while you're riding the bike, and I'll show you where in the display you have to activate that, because if you just plug it in, you won't get any charging power, but I'll show you here where to change that. So to go to advanced settings, you're gonna hold the plus and minus buttons, pretty typical for e-bikes. That takes you to the advanced settings screen. Here you can just reset the trip meter real quick, or you can go into your settings. Though quite a few, so we have screen brightness here, speed unit between kilometers per hour and miles per hour, and if you wanna change one, you just go in, you change it to what you want, and then you can back out. Down here, consumption unit, and that will just change between watt hours and amp hours if you want to see how you're using the battery or how you're draining the battery. Here you can go to language. They have 3, which is English, French, and Dutch. We'll leave that back. Factory reset will just reset everything on the bike. Bluetooth connection, auto off timer, which will just, you get to pick how long the bike chooses to shut off after you stop using it. USB charge enable, that's where you'll go in and turn that on or off for that port. And then available function. This is basically all those data screens we saw on the homepage that I was cycling through. You can choose which ones are shown. They're actually all shown right now, but if you didn't want all those screens, you could go through and just uncheck some of those, and then that would allow you to just remove those from those data screens. So you can basically have as many or as little as you want. So we will go back from settings, and then you have just information about the bike should you need to get service work or change firmware, things like that. You can get the serial numbers, firmware numbers, all that information about all the hardware. So this is the motor information, battery information, and then the displays information. So all those would be needed if you did have some sort of issue with the bike, and that's where you could find them. And then you're back to your home screen. Now there is no app for the Vvolt Centauri II, and with all the data options you have on this display, I'd say that works just fine. And that really wraps up the display. All in all, it's got everything you need, plus some wireless or some charge outputs, and it's visible in sunlight. It's just done a good job. I've been happy with the display overall. All right guys, out here on the Vvolt Centauri II. Been riding it for a while, all week, and out here for about an hour. And I just want to chat about how it rides. So the riding position is going to be mostly upright. I could take one hand off the bar here and kind of look around, see, no problem. And when I go back to both, I've got a nice, just kind of hybrid upright position, and it's kind of finished off nicely with the ergonomic rubber grips, which are lock-on, so they won't spin, so you really can lean into them, and they make good platform rests for your palms. Now when it comes to comfort, the saddle is nice and comfortable. The 2.4-inch tires help with that as well. And then of course you have your monoshock up front with 100 mils of travel. Now, when it comes to the monoshock, it does a great job of taking the edge off of sharper impacts, coming off curbs, roots, transitions in the concrete in front of you, things like that. It really shines in. I wouldn't expect, if you were to buy this, for it to feel like some super plush mountain bike fork with 150 plus mil of travel. This is not that kind of fork or suspension system. This is something that's just going to take the edge off your ride, make your commutes a little bit smoother, and I think it does a great job at that. Now the tires down below are the 27.5 by 2.4 inch. They are commuter tires, and they have reflective stripes on them, which I always think is a win, especially for a bike meant to be around cars. And when it's subtle like that. One thing I like about these tires is they have no rolling noise at all. Pretty consistent with a commuter bike. You've got some seeping and traction spots for wet pavement, but overall it's pretty much a slick tire, but that equates to low rolling resistance and most of all, low noise. Now speaking of noise, I don't know if you can hear it, but the motor has, I'd say, a slight noise to it. It's definitely not silent, but it's also not super loud, but it's just present, making you aware, that it's working when it is. Now where this bike gets really interesting is, one, it's the motor. So we've got a mid-drive motor that does feel really good. It's got a nice natural pedal feel. It's also got plenty of power, so 350 watts nominally and 650 watts peaking, along with 120 newton meters of torque. So a really nice setup for a mid-drive in general. Right now we're in chill mode, but you've got 4 modes total, all the way up to turbo, each one getting more powerful in the pedal assistance. So let's turn it on to turbo and just see how long it takes to get to 20 miles an hour. 3, 2, 1. So we're at 20. And right there we hit 28. So with no throttle, no gear shifting, because remember, automatic gear shifting on this bike, you can get to 28 pretty quick, and you couldn't hear it on camera or feel it obviously, but the bike did a downshift and helped me get up to speed a little bit quicker. Now speaking of the automatic shifting, so I was a little, I'd say, apprehensive about this when I first saw it on the spec sheet, but they did it well. So they've got only 3 gears, and when you have only 3 gears, the bike has a lot less ways to kind of screw up. If this was some 7-speed, 10-speed, I'd be a little concerned. But with only 3 gears to deal with, it does a really nice job of knowing when to shift. Now there was one point on a hill where it definitely took its time shifting to an easier gear, but overall it wasn't bad. Now the brakes are Shimano MT200s, 180 millimeter rotors, 2-piston calipers. Let's get up to 20 and just test the braking real quick. And there we go, 3, 2, 1. I mean, they stop you really quick. There's a little bit of modularity in there, nothing super fancy, and they definitely get the job done with plenty of braking power. I don't know if you could hear that one go by, but with its larger 4-inch tires, it's got a lot of rolling noise, like they just make a lot of sound. And this one, 2.4 slicks, just very quiet. When it comes to this cockpit, like we said, no shifting triggers because you have automatic gear shifting, but you have this one button here. Now you've got the bell obviously, but there's another button down here. That's the boost button we talked about. So the boost button, if I'm between 5 and 20 miles an hour, and I push it, it's gonna give me 4 seconds of full power. Now that might seem kind of odd to some people. Why not just put a throttle on it? Well, I think Vvolt, and this is me guessing, I have no idea, but I think they want this to be more of a true, just kind of a city cycling bike, a bike you're going to pedal, a bike you're not gonna rely on a throttle for. But in the event you want some juice getting over a little hill, a little tough spot, maybe you're just tired and you want a little help, you can certainly hit the boost button. So let's hit the boost button and see kind of what speed increases we get. So right now I'm going about 10.5 miles an hour. I'll hit the button and we'll see what we get. 3, 2, 1, slight pause, boom, there it is. So we went from about 10.5 to about 16 miles an hour. And the cool thing about the boost button is I could really just hit it over and over and over if I wanted to. I've not seen it tell me no or just stop working. It can kind of be used like an intermittent throttle over and over and over, should you want to do that. I also don't know if you could hear on camera, but it did shift during that because I asked for a bunch of power all of a sudden, and it obliged, but also shifted to kind of make it smoother and faster. So we'll try it again, 3, 2, 1. And we're from 10.6, again up to 16.5. So about a solid 6 mile an hour gain in a couple seconds there. I think it's gonna be a feature that people might not think is that great in the beginning, kind of like I did, but I've come to kind of appreciate it. It's there if I want it, but it's also not enticing me with just all day throttling. It's really going to depend on you and what you like, but I'd say it's a nice addition without fully axing off the throttle. All in all, it rides nice, guys. The monoshock does a good job of taking the edge off. The braking's nice. The wheels are quiet. There's a little bit of motor noise. Automatic gear shifting is good. All in all, it's a really nice, smooth commuter. But let's go talk to Ben, our mechanic, and just kind of get his thoughts from just all his years of working on bikes. All right, hey guys, welcome back. And this is that time where I get to do less talking and let the guy who knows a lot about bikes do more talking. So this is Ben, he's our in-house mechanic with a lot of experience on bikes, and he's gonna share his thoughts on the Vvolt Centauri here and just kind of go through his pros and some things he would work on to improve. And Ben, I'm gonna step out of the way and let you do your thing, but before I do, thank you to Feedback Sports for providing us with this Pro HD aluminum rack. Super stable and durable, lightweight, easy to get around, and it does well even with heavier bikes on it. With that said, there'll be a link down in the description if you want to check their stuff out. But Ben, go ahead and do your thing, man.
All right, thanks, Mike. I really like this Vvolt bike. This thing rides awesome. I'll just touch on the things that I do like. There's not a long list of things for me to pick on. First and foremost, I always like to sight a through axle on the fork. So what that again does for a rider is it lends itself to a lot more stiffer, a lot more stable front end. Plus, I was thinking about it a little while ago, and that's actually a really nice theft deterrent. So it's a lot less common for somebody to carry a wrench to steal your wheel, or try to. If you've got a quick release, it's great for flat tires, but in this case, if somebody wants to steal your wheel or the bike, that through axle does make it a little bit tougher for them. Other things to really like about this are the threadless steer tube and stem. I've touched on that before. Much more common, much easier to find replacement parts for. We'll get back to the fork in just a moment, but I do like the threadless aspect of that. Anytime you pair a belt drive and a mid drive on a bike, I'm immediately going to be a fan. They're smoother, they're quieter. The power band feels awesome. It's nice and smooth. I absolutely love the way this thing feels. With this mid drive, it also does have an oversized hollow bottom bracket spindle, and even with that, some external bearings, which just make that standing platform a lot stronger, more stable when you're up off of the saddle, really climbing up, riding up a hill. I like the cargo rack for a couple of reasons. It's got multiple mounting points, so it does make it so that you can put a lot more weight on it, but it's also adjustable, which is a nice feature. So if ever you wanted to change the tilt to add or subtract different cargo rooms, or cargo pieces rather, it gives you more room for that. The auto shift on this thing is something I've never felt before. It does only have 3 gears, but the auto shift means when you get up to certain speeds, it'll just shift into a different gear. The one thing I like most about that, you'll be in 3rd gear, coming down a hill, maybe 25 miles per hour. All of a sudden you come to a stop sign or a stoplight, maybe somebody's crossing the road. As you stop, it immediately shifts into 1st gear for you. So the cool part about that is when you start going again, it's in its easiest gear. You didn't even have to mess with the shifting. I think that's awesome. So that kind of summarizes what I like about this bike. The built-in headlight, it does look pretty nice as it comes out of the box. You know, it fits the aesthetics really well, but what will happen if and when this thing breaks? How easy is it going to be to replace this? Maybe the bulb goes out, maybe the wiring goes bad. In a case like this, it seems like a handlebar mount light, something like that, that's easier to replace, probably even easier to find parts for, might be a good thing to consider for those folks that are going to ride the bike. Last thing, and this is just me being picky, these rubber boots on the crank arms, these were initially invented for mountain bikes. So as you're climbing through really rocky terrain, you do what's a pedal strike or a crank strike, and it hits the crank arm against a rock as you pedal through. This isn't a mountain bike. You're really not going to ride it off-road. These things do slide around a little bit, so I just kind of wonder why they're there. I guess it's cool, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. Otherwise, man, great bike. Those are the only things I can pick on, Mike.
All right, guys, so that wraps up the Vvolt Centauri II. It's really nice seeing an e-bike company that's not following the crowd and making the same type of e-bike. They're trying new things, they're being innovative, and for that, I definitely give a nod to their effort. It's got some really interesting tech, things like the 3-speed automatic gear hub that I thought was great. The 120 Newton meters of torque felt very responsive and powerful. And this monoshock head tube suspension up front is a really unique take on things, along with the frame integrated front headlight. Now, if I had to come up with areas for improvement, of course, there's going to be some. Some of you guys will just wish there was a throttle, and you'll definitely want that on an e-bike. And I get it, some people rely on throttles, or at least having the option to throttle is nice for some folks, while other folks, maybe true, more hardcore cycling fans, are gonna be happy to see there's no throttle on there, probably an individual case-by-case basis. I'll also say another area for improvement, or at least an area that I have my concerns about. So the headlight on this, 2 things. One is if I happen to break this, I'm only going to be able to buy that headlight, as far as I know, from Vvolt, and I hope they'll be around a long time to provide those should I need one. And then beyond that, the location of the headlight, because it's frame integrated, generally speaking, I commute on my bike, I have a headlight on my bike, and I rely on when I turn with my handlebars to look through my turn and see the path in front of me. But because it's head tube mounted, when I turn those handlebars, my light path does not turn with me. Now, it's not a huge deal breaker, and you still have some ambient light that goes wide, and you can still relatively see what's going on. It's just one of those things. Personally, I like having my light on the handlebar, and then there's the whole proprietary design of it. But these are small issues in the bigger picture. The bike is very smooth and quiet. It rides really nice, and unless you have plans to crash that headlight or really smack it into something, I don't even know that that's really going to be an issue in general. All in all, I was very happy with the Vvolt Centauri II. It's a cool new innovative take. If I didn't answer any of your questions that you may have about the bike, you can drop them in the comments. I'll personally reply and find out that information for you. If you haven't done so already, consider liking and subscribing. It is the giving season. And until the next review, I'll see you guys out on the trail.